Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a great lunch. Some of you heard this. I just want to reiterate, this is a full session. So if you are saving a chair for your lovely bag or purse or computer, if you could shove it under your chair. We're just trying to get as many people in as we can. A couple of reminders: you may not sit in the aisleways or on any of the platforms in the back of the room. There's still plenty of isolated chairs, so if you see another facilitator with a red staff badge, we're happy to find a seat for you. The usual announcements, if you've been here a few days, just some reminders. The exhibit hall is open until 5:30 today. We also have our poster session and reception from 3:30 to 5:30 right after this presentation in Dean's Hall. Remember, if you're getting continuing education credits, you must hand in the verification form at the end of your last day, including the codes that we're giving out at the end of the session. If you are an ASHA member watching via webcast today, CEUs are not available through Penn State or Patton. As an attendee of the webcast, what you'll have to do is print a copy of your attendance certificate and submit that certificate to ASHA directly. If you're in person looking for ASHA credits, that doesn't apply. Do your usual forms. You can access the PowerPoints if you're joining us as part 2 of Dr. Hanley's speech today and you've accessed them this morning. Welcome back. If you are here for part 2 and you don't have them, check the Groupio app for the handouts. We're also anticipating your feedback at the end of the session, which you can provide via Groupio as well. 2 other reminders and notes. Please do not take any videos or audio or pictures of any of the videos that Dr. Hanley may be sharing, just protecting confidentiality of his students and any of his clients that he's involved in. We appreciate that. Any of the slides of text is fine. We're also going to do this session straight through today. Dr. Hanley has a lot of content to cover. We're only going until 3:30. I promise the snacks will still be there. Snacks are open until 4 o'clock, and there's more snacks in Dean's Hall for the poster session, so join us there as well. If you need to take a break, please just sneak out quietly. If you have any questions, again, look for one of us facilitators. All right, I'm not going to do any further introductions, so welcome back, Dr. Hanley.
Good afternoon. If you weren't with us this morning, I had some major microphone issues, so I think I figured it out. I found a lovely pink phone up here. It seems like it matches your dress, and so it's really well planned out. Okay. We're going to talk about treatment. Again, if you need to take a break, just take breaks. There's lovely snacks out there, and just take a break when you need it. Okay. We talked this morning about assessment. The assessment is simply a process to develop a highly motivating and safe teaching context. I say that because our treatment is based on developing skills. We always, no matter what the function of behavior is, we always elect to do a skill-based treatment. We do that because a number of studies have shown that the best way to promote generality of the treatment is to make sure the child has skills, that it's not overly managed by arbitrary rewards and punishers that develop some sort of stimulus control that is artificial, and so when they're in context without those artificial controls, the problem behavior returns. The other element to the treatment I want to foreshadow is that it's a progressively developed treatment. It's about teaching skills. And this is one of the biggest gaps between research and practice that I've discovered. 2 things. One, in research, people take data in sessions, those little data points. But in practice, people are making decisions often on data points, but those data points are composed of all-day data, all-week data, or an hour's worth of data. The data points we're making decisions on are based on 5 trials or 5 minutes. So please know that in our consults, we've learned over time that a big reason why we're doing and reporting the particular outcomes in short time frames is largely simply dependent on the amount of data you make decisions upon. and I ask you to carefully consider getting access to your data in smaller bins, visually depicting it so it can control your decisions about the next steps, because this is merely a shaping process. I'm just describing shaping, but in a somewhat systematic way. There's a lot of criterion changes, and you want to make those changes based on small bits of behavior so it can progress at a defensible pace. The other aspect of this process that sometimes is challenging when I think about common practice right now is that in practice you're expected often to do a functional assessment, write a behavior support plan, in-service a bunch of people on it, and then have it implemented 24/7 or during the school day right afterwards. I don't know historically where that model has come from, but please know it's a historical accident, one that has very little or no empirical support in our literature. If you want to affect a meaningful change, you can't write a program and train people on it and expect that meaningful change to happen tomorrow. It just can't be had. There's some bitter pills we need to swallow. That's one of them. If you want to create a meaningful change in behavior, it takes a lot of work. I want you to think about it this way. When a master's student goes into your program and they're going to learn about research design, you allocate minimally 45 hours to teaching mere verbal behavior about how to control a behavior with an independent variable. 45 hours. What you're expected to do with a child with autism is teach them a lifestyle where they engage in socially adept performances in challenging situations for the rest of their life. I think it's probably worth as much time as we spend teaching research design to a language-able 25-year-old with a bachelor's degree, yes? So the process I'm going to describe to you today takes on average 30 hours. Those 30 hours of therapy can be distributed 2 hours a week. That's what we do in our outpatient, 2 to 3 hours a week. It's mighty slow calendar time, because then it's going to take 2 months. Or you could do a model where you expose the child to this process for 5 hours a day, and you might be able to finish in a week. So a lot of people ask me, how long does this take? I say, well, it depends on how often you can arrange the teaching sessions. We have data shown by Dr. Jessel that it can take but a week to get the entire repertoire built, and a second week to train relevant people in relevant environments to implement over relevant time periods, which is our goal. It can be a 2-week process. However, for me in an outpatient clinic or in consultation, it takes usually 2 to 4 months. But on average, it's about 30 to 35 hours of therapy, which is less than a course. Okay, so I just want to wrap our heads around some of the inevitable things that you might confront. We have a set of expectations on our profession to solve problems in ways that are not just heroic, but I would say are probably impossible. And it's important that we educate folks on what we're capable of doing and the timescales required to create really meaningful behavior change. These are some words that I think are relevant to the process. Some of these words are not scientific, but I think they're relevant. I do a somewhat lack of a careful job mixing scientific terminology with typical language. I do that partly on purpose, partly by accident. The process is safe. Safety is paramount. We do not invite risk into these therapeutic processes. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about ways to minimize risk. We don't want restraint. We don't want people hurt. And I don't do these processes with batting helmets and jean jackets and arm pads and whatnot. The safety can be found in the details of the therapeutic process. Understanding. We don't treat until we understand behavior to some extent. And by understanding, I mean we are able to turn it on and off. That's my simple definition of understanding behavior. You can understand behavior to some extent if you can turn it on and off. Trust. That's a tough word. We don't talk about that. We work with a lot of children with language nowadays. It's very easy to ruin the relationship before you even begun by the choices you make in the therapeutic process. We try to make choices so children and young men and women willingly enter the therapeutic, choose to enter the therapeutic place because they trust that they will be effective under those conditions. And so I'm going to talk a lot about how we start the process, how we move the process along to make it emulate reality, but we don't start there because we want to make sure that we build trusting relationships and children choose to participate in the process. Holistic, that controls a lot of different responses, so let me tell you what I mean by holistic. I simply mean that the process recognizes that whole things have properties that cannot be found in the parts. And I'm referring primarily to reinforcement contingencies. We always used combinatorial or synthesized contingencies because those contingencies have a power or a control over behavior that can't be found in the parts. So if we didn't get to talk earlier today, please know that I will not talk about treatments involving attention or escape or tangibles only. It's always combined, and by so doing, we can get powerful effects. Progressive, I talked about, it's shaping, that's all I mean by that. We start here, but we end here, and there's a process to get there. It's a progressive treatment. It's not something that problem behavior is solved in a day. High expectations. We talk to parents a lot about this. There's a great article written by Mary Beth Walsh. It's in Behavior Analysis and Practice. It's freely available on the web right now. Again, Mary Beth Walsh, Behavior Analysis and Practice. It's called 10 Reasons Why Children with Autism Deserve ABA. And I give it to all our parents that we meet through consultation or clinic. But the one thing I love about it is she talks about how getting the diagnosis, kids often suffer from what she calls the tyranny of low expectations. And I hope you see in some of the videos here that we hold kids with autism to very high expectations, maybe beyond that of their same age peers. And by so doing, we think their repertoires are that much more refined, and I think they need to be to protect them from mismanaged contingencies they're going to experience going forward. It's always based on skills. We try to make sure it fits within the context they're coming to us from. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is balanced relationships. Again, those are loaded expressions, but what do I mean by that? Some families are overly controlling and teachers the situation in the child with autism. It's overly authoritarian is what some psychologists would describe it as. By contrast, some families we meet or classrooms we go into, it's very permissive. Anything goes, we respect you and you can do whatever you want. So there's that. And then there's the other one where it's like it's my way or the highway all day. We're constantly working towards finding the balance, making sure that kids with autism do precisely what they want to do as long as it's not victimizing others or hurting themselves to a large extent, while also learning to be effective in the neurotypical world that they have to exist in. It's about balance. And so you'll see these themes that I'm putting up here throughout the treatment process. Okay, let's get to it. I'm going to use a case example to start. I'm going to talk about a boy named Zeke. You may have, if you've come to any of these trainings before, you may say, my man, why are you using the same clients? We work with a lot of clients. I'll show you those data, but I use the clients that I had somewhat of a close relationship with because I can see the process. A lot of times I can't see the process, so I won't tell the story. So I apologize, but Zeke is a young man that you probably have met someone like Zeke. So that's there's some generality to his story. So Zeke was a 14-year-old boy who was served in a specialized school. He had 2-to-1 ratio, 2 adults to Zeke. Zeke engaged in severe self-injury such that there was some calcification of the orbital bones and some callous skin. He had kind of leathery skin from years of punching himself. That was his primary form of self-injury. He also engaged in aggressive behavior. You learn that later in life, and he was big. Now that he was 14, he was a big boy, and he was capable of hurting people, and he had hurt people and sent them to the hospital and out of work and whatnot. That's why he had 2 staff to 1. So the process involves first interviewing. I'm just going to give you the parts of the interview that reveal the most information. First question, what are the problem behaviors? Well, it's self-injury or aggression. Okay. What tells you that those behaviors are about to happen. I don't ask the question, what are the precursors or antecedents, because those words don't help often. I ask, how do you know it's about to happen? How do you know when to call for backup? Questions like that. And what they answered was, well, sometimes he bites his finger, sometimes he stomps, elbows the table, sometimes he gets up and he body tenses. I just need to know if two people can observe it reliably. If the answer is yes, I'm going to put that into the class of behaviors I'm going to look for. Okay. Next set of questions, I'm going to try to get at the reinforcers. The question was this. If Zeke was having a meltdown, he was engaging in self-injury, trying to attack members of the classroom, there was $1 million here. Could you turn it off within 10 seconds? I asked first, what's your confidence you could do this? She said, I'm mildly confident. Okay, what would you do? And she went into this fairly complicated story that I'll condense very quickly. It went like this. First thing, I'd need to let him stand or sit or walk wherever he wanted to in the classroom. Generally, he'll choose to sit in his beanbag chair. Very good. Second, I got to make sure I don't ask him to do any work, and I got to take all indicators of work out of the scenario. I got to take his blue binder with all his data sheets and IEP goals, put it away. Third, I have to be available to him, be close to him, but don't talk to him or look at him unless he wants me to. I say, how do you know he wants you to? Because he'll indicate. He'll reach out to me, he'll grab my hand, he wants particular tickles, he wants me to watch him engage in stereotypy, but he kind of has to run the show. Okay, very good. She said, I also have to give him his bin of stolen property. I said, okay. The story's getting juicy now. I said, so what does that mean? And so she said he has a bin, and in the bin there's pens and straws and strings and all sorts of broken plastic pieces, and he likes to tap them against his teeth and against the table and twiddle them and all that stuff. I said, well, why is it his stolen property? He said, well, there's a program where basically at night they often find stuff on him that it is not his, and it's usually lodged in his underwear. And so when they find stuff, people have 24 hours to claim it, and if they don't claim it, it goes into his bin. I want you to think about that. That's called intermittent reinforcement of stealing. This is a very smart and good group, but it just morphed into something kind of strange. And I don't know about you, but I don't care how great I love that pen. When staff pull it out of his underwear after a day in his pants, I'm not sure I want that pen back. And so he had a fairly populated bin of materials, and that's not surprising. And so she said, I have to give him his bin of materials. And then lastly, if he engages in motor stereotypy and vocal stereotypy, I have to not shush him or prevent that. Let him do his thing. Okay. And so I said, if he's on his beanbag chair, no demands imposed, has his bin of stolen property, he's got you locked down, you attend to him when he indicates, you let him engage in stereotypy, can you guarantee there'll be no problem behavior? She said, I can't guarantee it, but I'm fairly positive. Great. The other question I'm trying to get at the controlling antecedents, or the conditions that seem to establish the value of those reinforcers and thus evoke the behavior. So it's a different hypothetical. There's $1 million, he's having a wonderful day. In 10 seconds, could you make him have a meltdown, or at least the beginning of one? And she said yes. She said it's the opposite of what I told you. I'd have to abruptly take his bin of stolen goods away, bring out his learning materials, bring other people to his cubby for some group instruction, have him do some work while I instruct other children. If he's getting disruptive with his stereotypy, shush or block. Okay. You see how this works. What are the reinforcers? What am I hearing? When I ask the question about what stops behavior, I'm secretly listening for the reinforcers. Please know that reinforcement strengthens the probability of behavior in the future, right, in a similar situation. But the local effect of reinforcement is that it stops behavior. So I ask a lot of questions about what stops behavior, because that might reveal the reinforcers. And then obviously the other question is about what's going to evoke the behavior. So now we're going to go do an analysis. She's going to do the analysis because she knows Zeke. The analysis is NISCA. I talked about this morning, so I'm not going to go far into it, but these are the data. The open circle represents a control condition. That's where he has access to all his reinforcers. The problem behavior and all its precursors are 0. That square is 5 minutes. To Zeke, there's no leaving the room. This is done in his cubby by his teacher. I then signal we're going to do the test. We talked about what that means in the interview. Now it means she's going to put the EO in place. She's going to remove his bin impose some work demands if she can get that far. She stands up. She says, Zeke, we got to do some work. He's fine. She goes to grab the bin of stolen properties, and he hits himself fairly hard. She immediately got down on his level, gave him his bin back, and said, we can do things your way. There was only one response. 30 seconds later, asked, do it again. She stands up. This time he engaged in what we call faux SIB. It was the response without contact. She didn't look at me. That wasn't a target behavior. She reinforced it, and that's the right thing to do, because were she not to have reinforced that, it probably would have escalated. After 30 seconds of reinforcement, he got up, meandered around the room. It looked like he was looking for things to steal from my perspective, because I couldn't get that out of my head. Then he came back to the table, and he sat at the table. When she tried to put the EO in place, he elbow banged the table. The rest of those behaviors that you see in the 2 per minute rate there are basically him whacking the table when she's putting the EO in place, her reinforcing it, it turns off. That's a functional analysis, direct observation of behavior, manipulating one aspect of the environment, turning on and off behavior. That's what we need to move to treatment. I need to know I can turn it on and I can turn it off, and I don't feel compelled to know much else because our process teaches us we can get to a good outcome without knowing those other things. Okay. These test sessions are now our baseline. Those are up there in the first column, but I'm going to put some other things on this graph now. And I'm sorry for the acronyms. There's a workbook that's on the website, and the workbook, page 1, has a legend. So if you're somewhat unfamiliar with this process, you might want to go to that workbook and look on page 1. It has a legend for every acronym I use will be on that page. FCT is functional communication training. So first step of all treatment is to simply teach the child to use some kind of expression to produce the same outcome that's acceptable. Zeke did not engage in any vocal verbal behavior. He had a communication device, Proloco to go on it, a button pressing device. He didn't use it much. The team agreed that we could wipe the first screen clear of all mini buttons and just put one big button up. There's a red button, and on it said, My way. My way, please, sorry. When he pressed the button, it would say, My way, please, and the teacher would provide the same outcome she provided for problem behavior. So this is the simple transition where we're trying to take the reinforcer away from problem behavior, reassign it to a simple response. Understand, this is not the time to do precise mand training. This is a sloppy mand. This is what we call an omnibus mand. It is not a generalized mand. A generalized mand is controlled by nonspecific reinforcers and no characteristic consequences. This, by contrast, is controlled by very specific consequences and very specific EOs. They just happen to be more than one. That's why the new word, we call it an omnibus mand. We do this because by providing a very simple response that produces a maximum outcome, problem behavior goes away very quickly, and children acquire this response usually within 5 to 20 minutes. As I mentioned this morning, FCT is not a process that should take 3 months. It should not take a month. It probably shouldn't take a day. If you have the right reinforcers, if a child is willing to punch themselves in the face or attack somebody, they should be willing to press a button for that same outcome if you have the right outcome. Okay. So you can see in this graph, within 5 minutes, he's already engaging in independent manding. Those are those elevated open circles. You can see that the phases run out for a while because we have a criteria of 2 sessions in a row with 100% independent communication and 0 problem behavior. I do not believe in 80% reductions or 90% reductions, even for precursor behaviors. So this is an open contingency class. Even a TISC is put up there in problem behavior. We're looking for 0. Because I worry when children leave our therapeutic space, if there's any residual problem behavior, it will be picked up by reinforcement. I'm done getting mad at people for not ignoring problem behavior. We can't as humans, so I don't expect it. What I do instead is put the onus on me, my team, and the child to learn skills with precision and to full exclusion of the problem behavior. Again, if you have all the reinforcers, we can have that expectation. Again, we run it out because there's a little bit of return of problem behavior as we're fading the prompt. I want to make something very clear how we get this off the ground, because in our consults, we lose people, consultees, at this step because FCT goes wrong. And people are asking, well, how do you prompt? What's your prompting system? What's your delay? And I don't have good answers. because we don't have good words to describe it, so I'm just going to model it. When you do the analysis, you look at the point at which the child engages in problem behavior. That's the indicator of about when you should prompt the communication response. So I told you the teacher, when the analysis, when she went over to take the bin of toy, when she stood up, there was no problem behavior. When she said, okay, it's time to work, there was no problem behavior. When she reached for the bin, that's when the behavior would happen. So now we teach her an FCT, stand up, say it's time for work, and then drop his hand on the button so it says my way, and then provide the reinforcer. We see when problem behavior happens, when we're presenting the synthesized EO, and we prompt just before then. So it's somewhat of an errorless procedure, and when we do that, we generally get that response off the ground without chaining. What you don't want to do is put the full EO in place. So here's a typical example. You might go down, take Zeke's bin away, get his work out, bring the learners over, and then prompt him to say my way. Well, in that process, problem behavior is going to happen, and it might be problem behavior, prompt, communication, and now you've got a chain that is fairly undesirable, okay? So that's the general tip. Prompt before the behavior is evoked, and you know it in your analysis. The analysis reveals that. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is make that communication response a little bit ready for what we call ready for prime time, ready for people who aren't going to behave in sweaty manners like we do. So with the first communication phase, we call it simple FCT, simple functional communication training. We like to have goofy terms too. In our research and practice group, we also call it sweaty FCT. You should be breaking a sweat in the beginning. It should look like this. Okay, Zeke, time to do some work. He says my way. Say, okay, we don't have to. It's fast, immediate reinforcement, because we don't want problem behavior to return right there. In the next step, we're going to slow it down, because people are not going to behave that way with Zeke when he leaves our therapeutic place. So with complex FCT, we delay the reinforcer ever so slightly, and we expect a little bit more behavior we shape. For Zeke, this response is not generally what we would do nowadays. Zeke was an early customer. But basically, we always teach someone to engage in an attention-seeking or a listener-seeking response before they mand. So the days of kids handing picture cards while not looking or saying my way while looking away, we try to make sure they find the listener, and we make it hard. We act like we don't know they're there, and they have to tap us and get us, and then mand. Second, we try to make sure we build in what is probably best called an autoclitic frame. Some people, speech-language pathologists, sometimes call them carrier phrases. Sometimes we have sloppily called them mand frames. Basically, may I have, my way please. The may I have blank is a frame. That frame has generativity. There's a handful of studies showing that if you teach the frame, kids insert other words in there, and their mand repertoire can develop without much direct teaching. So we always try to take advantage of that. So again, it's tap, tap. For him, he hits a button that says, may I have? He swipes to a lower level on Pro Loco to go, my way, please. For kids with language, it's a very similar process. Sometimes it involves shaping. It takes 10 different steps to get the whole interaction. If you're interested in seeing the details, there was a study published in the very last issue of JABA. I'm going to give you the woman's first name. Her first name is Mahshid, M-A-H-S-H-I-D. Her last name is Gayamagami, or probably said better a different way. But nevertheless, she has an article called Shaping FCT Responses, and this whole process I'm referring to is articulated well in her paper. Okay. We also call this cool FCT. No more sweating. Slow it down. So the teacher now, by the end of this phase, would go, oh, stand up. Okay, Zeke, it's time to do some work. She'd go to grab the bin. He would get her attention either by waving at her or tapping her shoulder. She would say, yes, Zeke. She also taught him to put his hands down after he got her attention. Once he was acknowledged, he then went to his iPad. May I have? My way, please. And then she would act a little dumb. Let me think. Sure. That's what I mean by we put a little bit of delay in there. Okay. Then she provided the reinforcer. So please understand, right now, this is not a great treatment. He hasn't done a lick of work. We haven't put the full EO in place. All he's doing is not hitting himself or others to produce the same outcome. It's a necessary first step. There's a little trust building here. Each and every EO, he has to do the same darn thing. It's not hard. But understand, this is not a treatment. FCT is not a treatment per se. It's just a baby step along the way. The next step is we're going to introduce disappointment, delay, denial. In this process, we usually say no to the demand half the time. The other half of the time, we simply reinforce the demand immediately. So this is the part of the process, again, where we're starting to build in the schedule that's critical to the process, and that is intermittent and unpredictable reinforcement. We think that's the schedule that yields repertoires of problem behavior. I know Charlie Catania is in the room. If you don't know Charlie Catania, you should, especially if you're a BCBA. Charlie Catania is one of my heroes. He was the first person who taught me behavior analysis in my first behavior analysis course. He has a lovely textbook. In that textbook, he teaches us all about the schedules, and I especially gravitated towards the compound schedules. As a geeky graduate student, I love schedules. Multiple schedules, chain schedules, concurrent chain schedules. And Charlie taught me them, and I used them a lot in my early research. However, with all that said, the schedules that have come out of the basic lab do not have a great fit when the child's going back in the school and classroom. They do not emulate life. When you teach even simple schedules, coming up with a real nice VI example is somewhat of a struggle. You're like, well, getting that letter telling you got into college. I have some examples, but they're never great. The schedule of life, to me, that maintains repertoire is intermittent and unpredictable reinforcement. From a child's perspective, when they go in the kitchen, they don't know which behavior is going to get them the cookie. They'll start with their words, and when that doesn't work, they might whine or flop or bite their finger, and it depends on whether grandma or grandpa's there. So there's some discrimination going on. But understand, the schedule controlling that repertoire of problem behavior can be concisely summarized as intermittent and unpredictable. So we're going to use the same schedule to maintain the life skills of communication, toleration, and compliance. And this is where it starts. At tolerance training. So from his perspective, it looks like this. On any given trial, his mand might pay off, or the teacher's going to say, no, we got to get to work. And then we teach him a very simple tolerance response. Say okay. Do it with your hands. Do it with your mouth. Do it with both. Some kids say, I'm cool with that. Some kids do this shrug, like it's an all good shrug, no weapons shrug. Okay? So we teach an explicit response to disappointment. Understand, most kids you serve that have severe problem behavior, they can communicate admirably. Most kids that come in our clinic have refined language skills. They can speak better than I can. What they can't handle is when their words don't work. We call that an emotional problem, okay, or gratification, impulse. There's all sorts of words describing it, so we're going to address that head on. We're going to put them in the situation. We're going to expose them to the rudeness of disappointment of no, later, no way. And as long as they say, okay, we then say, you're so good at handling disappointment, and we provide the reinforcers. Okay, that's the important part of the therapeutic process. Understand, we still pay off communication immediately some of the time, otherwise it will go away. You can't, if you want something to persist, it has to be reinforced immediately some of the time. So the process again here, communication works half the time. He has to say okay to a denial the other half of the time. They're just little chains of behavior. One's a little longer than the other. When we do that, he very quickly learns to tolerate, and he's still communicating. That's what those data are showing. Again, is he done? Is he ready to go home? Of course not. This is not a treatment. He's still not doing any work. He's still not letting the teacher teach. So now we're going to go to the third part of treatment, and that's what we call it chaining, or the development of contextually appropriate behavior. The context here is school, so the contextually appropriate behavior is academics. The stories about what evokes behavior is where we get our contextually appropriate behavior from. So what do you think would be the thing the teacher wants him to do the most, given the story she told us in the interview? What does the teacher want him to do now? Work. And under what conditions? Without his been a stolen property. without hitting, without problem behavior. What else? In his chair, with other learners, maybe while she's teaching other learners. Exactly. So people say, well, what do I chain? When we get past communication toleration, it's all the situations that people describe as evoking problem behavior. What's the expected behavior there? That's what we're going to work towards. Again, this is a shaping process, so we don't start out with bringing a bunch of kids in his cubby. We start out with things he can do. In this case, it was gross motor imitations. And then we eventually escalate up into authentically challenging expectations. The bottom panel shows compliance. These are intermittently sampled data. If the bar is white, it means he's doing developmentally easy things. Gray, somewhat harder. Black are the wish list items. He's doing work independently while the teacher's teaching other kids in his cubby. You'll notice they fade in. If the bar's thick, it means he's compliant. If the bar's thin, it means he was not compliant. In general, he's compliant. As time goes on, other staff, other teachers get involved. At the end of treatment, problem behavior is 0. These are hour-long sessions now. The time of sessions gets longer over time. He still communicates because it's reinforced intermittently and unpredictably, sometimes immediately. He's still tolerating, and he's engaging in school-based, contextually appropriate behavior. He's always asked questions about the meaningfulness of the outcome. These are the data from Zeke. The procedures teachers find acceptable, but the most important one is the satisfaction with the improvement in problem behavior. I know these data are subjective, and some people dismiss them because of it. They don't take them. They feel like they don't need that. To me, showing an effect in 10-minute sessions without showing that the constituent finds the effect satisfying or meaningful is a bigger issue. So we need to find better ways to convince ourselves that we're getting a nice generalized response. We need more studies measuring in authentic environments for longer periods of time, of course. But this is a pretty decent proxy along the way if you can get people to say they're satisfied with the amount of improvement in behavior. People always ask, well, what's the treatment? There's no tidy name for it because it's a process, but this might be the tidiest we can come up with. Intermittent, unpredictable reinforcement of life skills. What are life skills? Functional communication, delay, denial, toleration, and compliance. You might say, why do we call these life skills? Well, we have a whole prevention curricula that's called, and I apologize for putting the P word in there because people think it's only for preschoolers, but it's called the Preschool Life Skill Program. Again, if you go to our website, it's available. That's a class-wide or small group curricula to teach kids to communicate, to tolerate, and comply in classroom situations. We do this to prevent behavior. We do this following assessment to intervene upon behavior. We always teach these skills, and we've shown, Kevin Lazinski has shown in a randomized clinical trial that these skills, develop them, does indeed prevent the development of problem behavior. And that's why we rely on these skills. Okay. Some people like schematics. This is a schematic drawing of the treatment. Some people like pie charts. This is a pie chart image of the treatment. I'm not being silly. Sometimes people figure it out better with these different visuals. Okay. How do you implement it? See these slips of paper? These are actually Zeke's slips of paper. Understand that developing these skills takes some expertise. I think it takes someone who is either a BCBA or really understands contingencies and effective teaching, or supported by somebody who does. Okay. Maintaining the treatment effects is not hard. That is easy. Here's what I mean by that. So these slips of paper, oh, you can't see. Those slips of paper, I want you to take a look at them and see what's there. Notice there's 3 FCRs. There's 10 slips of paper. There's 2 tolerance responses. There's a couple that say 2 trials. That means do 2 trials of work. There's a couple that say 2 minutes of independent play, 36 trials of work. What the teacher did in the beginning was to put these slips in her pocket. He was on reinforcement, on his beanbag chair with his bin of stolen goods. When he wasn't looking, she'd take a slip out. That was her expectation. FCR. She put it back in. Okay, it's time to do some work. May I have my way, please? Of course. During reinforcement, you should pull out another slip. 36 trials. Ooh. Come on, let's go do some work. How long should the reinforcement period be? As long as you want it to be. Doesn't matter. Do what life allows you to do. Now he says, excuse me, may I my way, please? She says, no. He says, I'm cool. She says, good, have a seat. These kids often look back at the teacher going, they sit and they look, they check in, because they never know when reinforcement is going to be provided. If you want eye contact, you want joint attention, you want people showing you their work, intermittent, unpredictable reinforcement often has those side bennies. So now he's at the table. What does 36 trials mean? For Zeke, it meant 36 consecutive trials of accurate work in the absence of problem behavior, manding, or stereotypy. And that is what I mean by a high expectation. Not good enough. Not he cooperated, because this is how Zeke was taught before this teacher did this work. You'd say, Zeke, match the red ones. He'd go like this. The red ones are here. You know what this is? No, you guide me. He would put his hand up to be guided. Okay. So we don't start with 36. Understand? That's what I mean by shaping. It starts out where he has to match two things in a row with no problem behavior, no stereotypy, then reinforcement provided, and over time, those chains are extended. I'm going to show you some videos before the day is over, and you'll see some kids who engage in very chronic stereotypy. They were unteachable. They don't pass IEP goals, and they are, locked in, because the contingency, if you hold it at a proper high expectation, you will get amazing behavior out of the kids. Okay, so that's his system. A lot of people don't like the papers. By the way, that's all the stuff you don't need for this treatment. I'd like to put Office Depot out of business. Everything you need for this treatment is in the environment, okay? I have a lot of this stuff in my basement. I bought too much. There are apps on our website. One's called Names in a Hat, one called Round'em. They're just randomizer apps. So teachers basically have smartphones and they just shake it up, and that tells them what the expectation is for that next period. That one's called, if you like spinny things. Okay, what I'm going to do now, just so we can move along, I'm not going to unpack the graphs. For those of you who like looking at the graphs, they're there for you. But basically, you're going to see a lot of these graphs. They show the same process. Problem behavior sometimes is variable throughout the process. Sometimes you're going to see it's near zero. You'll see communication, toleration, compliance, and then what this bottom graph represents is balance. If it's gray, the bar is gray, it means they're in reinforcement. If it's black, it means they're in the EO, the adult time. You notice in the beginning, it's all them. By the end, there's a balance, okay? So that's a typical graphical depiction of the therapeutic process. If you were with me this morning, you met my little Hulk man called Brandon. He's a little tough guy. This is him in treatment. The gentleman is the analyst. Mom is in the room as part of the reinforcement interval. If you weren't here this morning, I want to make it clear, parents are always part of the process in the clinic. They're either doing it and we support them, or they watch us and we transfer it to them. This is an example of the latter.
Yes.
You're so smart. Okay, dude, I want to play with those toys now. I want you to read books. Yeah. No, not now. Thanks for saying that's cool. It's my turn. Thank you. You can take these books and you can go sit over there.
This?
The two books, yeah, this one too. Oh, you know what? That's not reading. I need you to actually come help me over here. Come pick up the crab.
Understand, parents change their minds, so that's what we expose kids to. If they listen, we challenge them again and challenge them again.
Good. Grab this yellow truck and put it in the bucket. Hey, great work, dude. You can have your way.
Okay, you probably remember him from baseline, where within a millisecond he got on the ground and started crying as soon as there was any removal of his reinforcers, okay? This is that boy Luke. He was the boy that yelled, no! And you feel some emotional responding. Understand, sometimes she reinforces the
Great.
communication, sometimes she reinforces
Finish this
toleration.
puzzle.
He was actually in the clinic because he needed educational testing, but was kicked out of all educational testing places.
Okay.
And
Next,
so we're
tell me
preparing him
what
for
color
that.
and
That's what
shape
that stuff
is
is.
this.
Green. Cylinder.
Very good. You can have.
The goal was two-dimensional shapes. He said cylinder. My point here by showing this video is a lot of times when we give kids the opportunity to respond, they impress us. They often know a lot more if we hold them to these high standards. This is the boy, Diego. He was on the spectrum. He engaged in severe self-injury and aggression. I showed you this morning. You didn't see the behavior, those behaviors, but you saw the precursors to them. This is an example of which he's going to reinforce toleration and then reinforce some contextually appropriate behavior the next time.
I'll push the apple off, he said. Let's do some work.
Excuse me.
What's up, buddy?
Please.
No way, Jose.
Okay.
You should have seen. Okay. Alright. Clean up your way. And he pushed and he struggled and he heaved and he tugged. That'll brush everything off. And then what happens? I don't know. We're gonna do some work to find out. What's up?
Hang on. Please.
No.
Okay.
Chelsea. Okay. Let's circle all of the C's.
Diego hadn't passed an tabletop IEP goal in over a year. He passed all his IEP goals in this
Perfect.
therapeutic process.
Go ahead. Go away.
You'll notice that blue board. I want to point something out. When we consult, we don't impose our clinical will overly on teams. We have what we call our non-negotiables. That might be personalized reinforcers, synthesized reinforcers, skill-based treatments. But otherwise, we let people do their kind of things. That board there, she's giving him checks when he engages in expected behavior, communicating, tolerating, getting things right. Understand that it's not the kind of board where he has to fill it to get reinforcement. That's one of our non-negotiables. We will not foreshadow how much work is required because that's what leads kids to melt down. Are you with me? She is merely giving him feedback. It's the same thing if I were teaching. If a child got it right, I'm going to go give them a little thumbs up in their visual field. I'm not going to make a big song and dance about it, but I'm going to give them that feedback that they nailed it. And then when it's an indicator that we're going to do things their way, then it's going to be, yes, you're finished. Let's go do things your way. This program wants to give them the feedback visually. That's lovely. It's not lovely if you say, we're going to do 10 things now. When you get the 10, then we're going to go. I know that's part of our culture. I don't know where it came from because I can't find a lot of studies showing it is a good thing. Yes, kids with autism might be slightly more anxious than a typical child. Yes, it's good for them to know what's happening when they're inserted into a new environment, a new classroom. But when they've been in that classroom for quite some time, I can't help but think all those visual cues and warnings and signals are just signals of impending doom that occasion the problem behavior. Are you with me? I like to teach kids to live in a world that has some vagueness to it, because that is our world. Parents and teachers cannot always make the right prediction. You can't use the red and green card because sometimes the contingencies aren't going to align. Okay? So we try to prepare kids for inevitable challenges and disappointments by not putting the cues in there. And we keep hope alive by providing reinforcement unexpectedly. And by so doing, you can get some pretty long, beautiful chains of behavior with children. Okay. Let's talk about extinction. Does this process rely on extinction, meaning withholding the synthesized reinforcers following problem behavior? The answer is sometimes. If a child is this big, like our little Hulkian friend, I have no problem withholding the reinforcers. Okay? I have no problem with a little bit of crying for a 2.5 or 3-year-old when their mom's in the room. I have a problem with extinction with very big people. I have a problem with extinction with language-able people who are going to remember it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it to their parents and anyone who will listen. That time you put your hands on them and made them do X, otherwise known as escape extinction. We're moving away from the use of extinction even with little people, so I'm going to tell you our alternatives. The first alternative is partial extinction. I don't use this often. One of my colleagues, past students, Laura Hanratty, uses it very well. She'll be publishing a study hopefully soon on it. With synthesized reinforcement, we have a unique opportunity that we can provide what we call partial extinction. You can provide all the reinforcers for the skills, some of those reinforcers for problem behavior. Which reinforcers for problem behavior? Usually escape. Are you with me? It looks like this. Johnny, put the iPad away. Let's get some work done. I don't want to. Okay, so there's no access to the iPad, and we're not giving him much love, but we're also not making him do his work. We're just waiting. In other words, problem behavior is yielding escape. And that's okay, because we're keeping our hands off, and there's no big fireworks, and they're pouting, and they're wrestling with their thoughts. And then they eventually come back and engage in the skill, and then they get the upgrade. That's called partial extinction. I don't like it because some kids in general, if you take that iPad away, they're going to keep on working with problem behavior to get that darn thing back, for instance. So I like what we call this no extinction with full assent model. Again, I'm previewing something that we have not published yet, so I apologize for that. But we've done this with a handful of cases. We have colleagues doing it down at Vanderbilt. We have some research partners down there. And we have enough data to convince me that it's worth sharing. Again, I use the peer review process to shine up and correct our interpretations, but I don't use it to tell me whether something works or not. We have experimental design that allows us to do that. So that's why I feel comfortable talking about this. So again, I'm going to talk about this process. Here are the missions. We're trying to answer these questions. Can we do this process without physical management, without physical prompting, without bursts of behavior, basically without escape extinction? Will children choose to participate in this therapeutic process, and can the process be made unassailable to critics, skeptics, bloggers with autism that hate ABA? I want them to see my process. I want them to see it. I try to connect with them. And I was, what do you think of this? Do you have a problem with this? And there's a couple that remain nameless, but I have a couple folks in that world that are very good because they give me feedback, and we develop some sort of a relationship. So I'm going to show you what that process looks like textually, and I'll show you a video. Basically, it goes like this. We do this with kids without language, too. I'll describe that later. This is for kids with decent to very good language, like that boy Jeffrey I introduced you to this morning. First, when he comes to the clinic, he gets a choice. As soon as he comes in the waiting area is met by the analyst, and the analyst says, do you want to come in and do some practice? We call it, with Jeffrey, practice sessions. Do you want to practice, or do you want to go home? We've worked with the dad that the dad agrees that if the boy says he wants to go home, he needs to take him home. Boy has never said he wanted to go home. So then we walk down the hallway. He's got a buffet of the reinforcers he brings in a room. We say, do you want to bring them all in? Do you want to bring some in? And then we have the math and the reading and all the stuff he doesn't like to do. We're going to bring that in. He brings things into the room. The analyst, in this case Ditu, reminds him again, if you want to leave, you can leave at any time. You can take all your stuff with you. Stuff. This kid likes Yu-Gi-Oh! Do you know what that is? It's like advanced Pokemon something. So he has Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. He's got an iPad. He's got a DS, a video game. When he leaves the room, the analyst will go with them and provide all the reinforcers we identified in the analysis. Okay. So understand what this is essentially is a concurrent chains. If you like fancy stuff, it's a concurrent chains setup where the child has a choice to go into this context where no behavior is required and they get all their reinforcers. This is non-contingent reinforcement. Or they can choose the therapeutic context. And in that therapeutic context, we're going to slowly escalate our expectations in the manner I just showed you. First, he's going to have to communicate, then tolerate, then engage in some compliant behavior. Speaking loosely, he can choose to get all his reinforcers for free, or he can go into an environment where there's a little bit of yearning and earning. This is contingent reinforcement. This is non-contingent reinforcement. Okay. This is a graph. These are his data. What you'll notice is there's not a lot of problem behavior on that top panel. You'll see a couple bumps. Those are some complaints. You're going to see 5 asterisks. I'm going to painstakingly describe what those 5 were for Jeffrey. That first asterisk was when we began chaining. He's in the middle of writing a long essay. In the middle of writing a long essay, he said, Ditu, my stomach's upset. I think I better go home. And I saw the video, and I'm watching it going, he just doesn't want to do his work. He's just getting out of it. But that's the process. So Ditu says, okay, well, if you want to go, you know it's okay. You grab your dad and take off. And the boy is apologizing to Ditu. I'm so sorry, Ditu, my belly. And he slinks out of it. He leaves with about half of his therapy hour left. The next time, a couple days later, you'll see those 2 asterisks together. He did the same thing. He left because of this bellyache. The next day he comes back. That's that 3rd asterisk. In the middle of session during the reinforcement period, he says, Ditu, my belly, I got to go to the bathroom. And Ditu's like, go. So he goes down the hallway. This is a language-able kid who cares a lot about all the undergrads walking around the clinic and all that. And he kind of messes himself right when he gets to the door. And his dad is there, and we have changes of clothes. His dad cleaned him up. Now, understand, in my old process, he would have sat in that room and messed his pants, because that's the process. You don't get out. The EO's in place. We're going to keep working through it till it's complete. That's behavior analysis sometimes, folks. Practice well. But that's what I mean by we need to change our processes. That's not the good stuff. So he left, he got cleaned up, and he returned to session to finish his work. Those final 2 asterisks is where he wanted to go back behind the one-way mirror and ask how he was doing. He'd like to check out his graphs and talk to the young ladies, usually who are taking data. This is an example of one of those chaining sessions.
You want to go in profile?
Whoa, we gotta get back to work. All right, I need this. We gotta finish our work for a bit.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
May I have my way, please?
No, not now.
Okay, that's cool with me.
Thanks for saying that. I'm gonna take this. You know what? You can pick what you want to do first. Want to do math first or more writing first?
It's a lot of
I have
choice.
a question.
Well, pick one of these 2 first right now. Math first or writing first?
Right.
Writing. Good choice.
My question was, can you still do the writing?
Not this time.
Okay,
Okay.
that's cool with me.
Nice. All right. Great. So you write the second sentence. Appreciate you asking, though.
We have easy and hard demands. An easy writing task for him is when he narrates his essay and Ditu writes it for him. The harder one is he has to write his own essay. We constantly mix in hard and easy.
2 more things. This is a complete sentence. He plays me and works with me as well. So, if it's a complete sentence, what should happen? Returns a new period, and then 1 more change needs to be made.
Notice these feedback prompts are but hints. I'll return to that in a moment.
That's really good. And then the last thing is names. What's special about when you write down someone's name? Dude, I love what you're doing. Let's get back to your way. Thank you for fixing that.
D's kind of weird.
So these kind of weird,
Wait,
but
it's still
you got it. That was
With kids in the enhanced choice model, after every session block before they leave, we reserve 5 minutes, what we call reflection time. We say, how'd it go? Is there anything you want to tell us? How'd you do? How'd we do? Most kids in this process have good language, just say, it's good, and don't want to talk. But some kids give us feedback. Jeffrey was one of those kids. He said, I really hate it when people try to help me, but they just give me a hint. Like, if you know the answer, give me the answer. Which I thought was so great. Like, I never would have. And so Ditu talked to him about that and said, but do you think people are going to do that to you at one point or another in your school? He said, yes. He said, well, don't you think I should try to do that so we can practice how you can handle that? Yes. And so he's purposely doing those things. So you see what I'm saying is we do talk to kids that have good language, high IQs, about this process, not during, not before, after. Because we really want them coming under control of the contingencies and not letting language get in the way, if you will. It's complicated. We don't understand it as much as we need to, but that's our process. These are social validity outcomes for Jeffrey. His parents were satisfied with the process and the outcome, but these are the data we're always looking for. My colleague Sandy Jin is here. Sandy Jin's one of the co-authors on the original article and was our sleep expert back in the day. But Sandy Jin was the first one in our lab, in our new clinic, to ever get feedback where parents said, "Thank you, the problem's solved." Sandy Jin, for me, goes down in history as the first person I have ever collaborated with where we got that feedback. Prior to that, the feedback was always, "Yeah, they're doing better. That works, kind of." But these are the outcomes we're really looking for. How comfortable with you? We have consent for this name. How comfortable are you taking Jacob to public places before visiting the clinic? How comfortable are you taking to places now? I'm not looking for mere reduction of problem behavior. We're looking to erode the restrictive lifestyle that's dictated by problem behavior. And hopefully we'll come up with better measures over time, but this is what we use until then. You might be saying, why? Why is this kid choosing a therapeutic process? He could take all his goods, go in the room, and never write an essay. Why would he ever choose this? So I want to talk about this. I think people in general, I think non-human animals, again, Charlie Catania's got some studies showing this. People prefer to yearn and earn, speaking loosely. Let me show you a simple study. This was published over 20 years ago. From a child's perspective, they've experienced FCT. They use a picture exchange. They can get 20 seconds of attention. That was one of their maintaining factors for problem behavior. That's the blue room. They went in the blue room, they hand a card, they get 20 seconds of attention. Contingent on handing the card, they get 20 seconds of attention. That's contingent reinforcement. The blue room is contingent. The red room, by contrast, there's no response requirement. You're going to get 20 seconds of attention for free according to time. How much is yoked to the contingent condition. So if the child requested 20-second bits of attention in that period, they're going to get 20-second bits of attention at the same time, no behavior required. That's called non-contingent reinforcement. That's the red room. Or you can go into the gray room, which is really a control context, and there's no attention no matter what you do and not delivered on time. That's there to make sure kids, kind of paying attention, and so we can discern maybe indifference from indiscriminated responding. I'm going to say this because there might be some people in the room that care about these procedures. Basically, if it's 33% to each one, it's indiscriminate. If it's 50-50 between red and blue, maybe they know what's going on, they just don't care. They don't have a strong preference for whether it's contingent or non-contingent. And that's why it's important to subject them to that kind of control context, okay? Nevertheless, this is what we call concurrent change. So the kid we have them press the switch outside a room. When they press the blue switch, they go in, get 2 minutes of FCT. They come out, have them press the red switch, they get 2 minutes of free attention. That goes on for a few trials. Those are called forced choices. And then we back off and they get to choose which one. We use, if they press one switch more than the other, that's an indicator of their preference for that treatment. Which do you think kids prefer? Before I gave it away. There's no mystery anymore. These are our graphs depicting 10 choice opportunities per session. Over time, you see that these kids learned to express a bias for FCT, or contingent attention, over free attention, or obviously no attention. So this is an early indicator that kids preferred contingent reinforcement over non-contingent reinforcement. Please know this study was preceded by basic studies showing that animals preferred to press a lever to produce some food rather than eat it out of the pile in the corner. It was called the contra-freeloading phenomenon, and that research kind of dried up because as the controls were added, it seemed like there wasn't much of a bias. But when we ask kids this question, it always comes out the same, whether they have autism, they're typically developing, we stack the deck by giving them more and better free reinforcement, and they still choose contingent reinforcement. In our context, too, please understand we ask for very little behavior in the beginning, and then by the end, we're asking for a lot of behavior. There's a lot of behavioral process going on. There's conditioning. Things aren't that aversive anymore once you get effective with them as we teach those skills with proper reinforcement. But nevertheless, I want you to consider this notion that kids can choose to participate in these processes. They can choose to have all their reinforcers withheld and earned back on an intermittent and unpredictable schedule. And they will willingly go into those contexts. Maybe we don't need to physically manage them into those contexts. Maybe we can let them make a handful of bad choices and ultimately still arrive where we want to arrive. Understand that this also isn't unprecedented, and oddly enough, it's done more with non-human animals than with humans. There's basic research labs that the monkeys get to choose whether they're going to go do their operant responses or not. If you go to the Washington, D.C. Zoo, you'll see these nets and these wires, and the chimps kind of choose whether to go to work, where they're doing, by the way, operant learning tasks, or stay in their home cage. I think it's about time we consider these choice models for the kids we serve, give them the opportunity to tell us whether they want to enter our therapeutic space or not. Let me give you another example of a choice that's somewhat counterintuitive. If you like the graphs, the data's there. I'm just going to do a little dance to describe it. If the child chooses this context right here, we're going to call predictable. This is after they've gone through skill-based treatment. When they go into this space, we say, listen, my man, you're going to always have to do 8 things to get reward. 8 things. In fact, we're going to put out a board with 8 boxes to make it abundantly clear. Every time you do a thing, you're going to get that check. When you earn 8 checks, reinforcement's provided. Same reinforcer influencing problem behavior. That's called predictable. It's also called fixed. It's always 8, and signaled. It's foreshadowed. Here is unpredictable. Unpredictable, on average, they're always going to have to do 8 things. But it's variable. Sometimes rewards can be provided for doing but 1 thing, sometimes 16 things. But on average, it's 8. And there's no signals. There's no foreshadowing. There's no warning. We're not going to say, this to come back to the table, it's only going to be 1. There's none of that. So it's variable and unsignaled, or unpredictable. And this one is whatever the control is here, which is just extinction. You do work and there's no outcome that's so valuable. Okay. What these data show is that all 4 kids preferred the unpredictable to the predictable context. We need to start questioning our foreshadowing. We need to start questioning our data sheets where we always do 10 trials. Why do you think kids choose this? Now, please understand, I don't do that research right now. I don't know the controlling variable for this preference. I'm merely describing a preference that seemed to have some generality. Why do you think they choose this one over this one? Yeah, maybe it's the probability of a short delay. Short delays control a lot of behavior. There's a lot of different models that all bring us back to that point. Okay? I want to speak about it loosely. It probably is the short delays. I think that's driving it. This keeps hope alive. This kills hope. Don't be a hope killer. Every time they come to the table, they got to do 50 trials of drudgery. Keep the hope. Come on, man, sit down. Let's do some work. But boom, match. Nailed it. Get the hell out of here. Right? And then next time they come back, they're going to be like, bam. You need another. Okay, bam. Never know. Okay? And as long as you progressively escalate it, you can get really long chains of beautiful, accurate behavior. It doesn't fit well within our educational or classroom context, so it's going to take some rationale and some engineering, but intermittent and unpredictable reinforcement yields really long chains of beautiful behavior. And I really encourage you to consider ways to engineer that. Okay, let's review the treatment now. This is apparently a good time to go to the bathroom. So if you have to go to the bathroom, no, it's really, I said we're all adults here. We can take. I'll show you just how an adult I'm not. Ready? Here's something I do with my undergraduates. It seems time for a joke. Even though this is filmed, I'm going to say it. I usually deny when people say, remember that time you told us that joke? I'm like, that wasn't me. It's completely disgusting. With undergraduates, I don't like to go over. I like to respect their time. I expect them to be on time, and so I also make sure they know I'll end class on time. But sometimes I just have to push it a little bit. I need 10 or 15 more minutes. So I do something like this. Okay, class, I know it's time to go, and it's just after lunch, and so some of you may have ate a bad ham sandwich, and you probably have diarrhea right now, and you just got to get the heck out of here, and I respect that. So if you need to leave because you have diarrhea, go. If you don't have diarrhea, stick around, and we're going to finish up the lesson. And I wait, and no undergraduate is going to stand up. There's no way. Social embarrassment is the main reinforcer controlling an 18-year-old's behavior. There's no way. Grad students, PhDs, are, by contrast, they'll all get up. Yeah, I got diarrhea. They're out of here. That's why I like to teach both types of students. They both humble me in different ways. Okay, back on task. So I'm going to do a review of treatment. People like to know, well, what's the treatment? This is the treatment. And these words matter. It's personalized and synthesized reinforcers delivered intermittently, unpredictably, and sometimes exclusively for skills. These skills are merely chains of behavior. Okay? They're not independent of one another. They're simply longer than one another. Communication, communication and toleration, or communication, toleration, and compliance. Let's talk about a couple of things that may help you implement this. A lot of times when you do the interview, the people are going to tell you there's a lot of situations or contexts in which problem behavior is happening in, and you may struggle with the choice of which one are you going to design your analysis from. And so we have a rule of thumb. It's called the 2 C's of context. The analysis we elect to put in the analysis that we're going to use to teach these skills has to be both challenging and convenient. Challenging. Why is challenging important? It's not a role play model. It's not, oh, you have trouble with when people disappoint you and take your stuff, and so let's talk about it, or let's like kind of role play it. Because if you just role play it, when the real situation occurs, you're not likely to get generality that way. And I don't have a study to prove this, but just follow me here. Generality kind of goes downhill. If you teach where the emotion, where the fire's burning the brightest, and then it's a less challenging situation, you're more likely to get the skills to occur there. So I try to purposely not avoid the most challenging situation. I try to ask questions to get me the most challenging situation. What is the most important set of reinforcers that when you remove is most likely to result in the worst meltdown ever? What's the hardest work that they're exposed to? Again, I'm not going to expose kids to things they haven't been exposed to. I want to have ecological validity. But at the same time, I need it to be challenging. I need to teach where the fire's burning the brightest. At the same time, it needs to be convenient. I'm not doing a functional analysis after I cut holes in an umbrella while the young man's in a shower. Oh, they have a lot of problems during shower routine. I'm not doing a shower analysis, and I'm not going to do skill building while the kid's naked. Are you with me? I'm not doing sessions at church or at Denny's or in vans or in hallways. If it's inconvenient, I'm not doing, because I need to be able to replicate that situation time and time again as I progressively shape the skills. So find that balance between challenging and convenient, and that's where you teach. I'm going to return to trust. If you want a child to trust you, immediately reinforce problem behavior, any one, as soon as you evoke it, and reinforce it with all their reinforcers. And do that a handful of times. They're good at problem behavior. That's how they find us. And then we provide those reinforcers for the same simple response, and it's easy. Kids then generally elect to join us. There is no guiding people to sessions. They willingly want to come to sessions. When you do communication, don't challenge them too soon. Keep it simple. This simple response yields this massive outcome. Trust me, each and every time, and until there's zero problem behavior, no emotional responding, 100% independent, I'm not going to challenge you any further. But once you get there, I'm going to make a little withdrawal on our relationship, but only after I built that trust in the early part of the process. Okay, let's talk about the features of a simple communication response. Obviously, we want to keep it simple, easy to learn. Second, we want it to be novel. Let's talk about this. There's a good study by K. Mark Derby in Research and Developmental Disabilities. It's very elegantly designed. There's also, I keep referring to Charlie Catania. I don't have a crush on him or anything. He's right here, and he has a lot of relevance to this stuff. Charlie's got some dialogue. Willie De Leon and Charlie published something in eJoba years ago that touches upon this very same topic. So there's conceptual papers on it. There's some empirical papers, but it goes like this. If you reinforce an existing mand in communication training, you're not likely to get a differentiated outcome where that mand will be at strength and problem behavior will be at zero, because if it's an existing mand, it's already a member of the same response class with problem behavior, and response classes are sticky. And by reinforcing that existing mand, the problem behavior might stick to it, and it'll persist despite no direct reinforcement in your teaching context. By contrast, if you pick a novel mand, a new form, a new word uttered, a different form of the behavior, and you only reinforce that form, you're more likely to get what we call differentiation, meaning the mand will elevate to the exclusion of problem behavior. We almost always elected to use novel mands. Don't go with the, well, they can already do it, so it'll be quicker. It'll be quick if you have the right reinforcers. Choose the novel mand so you get rapid differentiation. Second, we always use an omnibus mand. Again, omnibus simply means it's controlled by multiple establishing operation and it's in multiple reinforcers. It's not a generalized mand. We use the omnibus mand because we want a simple response that yields a big outcome quickly so we can eradicate problem behavior in our first treatment session. If you try to teach a child to mand for escape, separately to attention, separately for toys, separately to... There's going to be a lot of problem behavior while you're trying to teach those somewhat complex conditional discriminations to kids. Get rid of problem behavior, and then you can do what we call differentiate the mand, and I'm going to show you some videos in a moment about how we do that. And then finally, make sure you choose a mand that can be effectively prompted. And what I mean by this is, even some kids with language, vocal, verbal, we still might use a sign. And we're going to do that partly because I can physically guide this. I can't make this happen. And so I'm going to make sure, especially with kids that tend to be oppositional, I choose a response that can be prompted so I can differentiate, reinforce it before problem behavior emerges. The last thing that's not on the slide, I want you to think about this notion of topographical, and this is what I was referring to with the eJoba article, topographical versus selection-based responses. Some of you know about these things, some haven't heard about these things, so I feel compelled to go over it. A topographical is one response where both the response form and the reinforcer are formally different. So a topographical response are my words. Diet Coke, steak, the form of the word is different for those different reinforcers. Sign is a topographical response. By contrast, pro loco to go, PECs. These are selection-based responses. The response is the same, right? This is the response for Diet Coke. This is the response for steak. It's differentiated by its placement on the board. For a lot of learners, it's very hard for them to make a conditional discrimination in a selection-based system. It's very hard for them to learn that this button yields that characteristic consequence, but this button yields that characteristic consequence. By contrast, they seem to be a little more adept when it's a topographical-based system, like sign or vocal. I know sign is denigrated for some reason in certain schools and in communities, but I want you to reconsider it at least early in the process because it can be prompted, because kids are more likely to make those conditional discriminations when you get to the point of differentiating the mand repertoire. Okay. We then move to a complex communication response. These are the general characteristics. We add in, obtain a listener before you mand. When you mand, put it in a frame. We might add social niceties if the development allows for it. And we work with SLPs and parents to say, is the pace right? Is the tone right? We get rid of like snarkiness. Do you know what I'm saying? We get rid of kids that kind of still are zinging people even with the mand. My way, please. You know what I mean? So we try to make it as acceptable and pleasant as possible. We'll spend time doing that before we move to toleration training. We call this phase complex communication training. Okay? Let's talk about differentiating the mand. I don't want kids going around saying, my way, please, for much longer. That's the beginning of the therapeutic process. Understand, we want the treatment to ultimately be recursive, and we just haven't been able to describe that in the literature. What I mean by that is there is no reinforcement interval or EO interval. We start that way, black and white. But it turns into a lot more vagueness. So let me tell you what it looks like at the end. Excuse me. Yes, buddy. Can I stop doing work now? Sure, why not? What would you like to do? I'd like my iPad, please. I'm sorry, we can't do that right now. Sally's playing with it. Okay, no problem. You know what? You're so good at handling the disappointment. Let me check. Maybe she's done. Oh, she's done. Here's your iPad. Will you play with me? No, I'm sorry, buddy. I can't. I got some work to do. Okay, no problem. Go ahead. And when they play independently for a while on that iPad, 5 minutes later I might go over and attend to them. Do you see what I'm saying? Precise manding is part of this process. It's a developmental process. If they have a repertoire of severe self-injury and aggression, we need to take them back to the omnibus man, get control of the situation, and then we'll facilitate development of that differentiated manding repertoire. Here's some visual, graphical, and video examples of that. So this is going to be subtle with Raj. Raj doesn't have any vocal verbal behavior that's under any kind of tight control. You're going to see signs. This is where you're going to see it first. When before we differentiate the mand, it looks like this. He taps or waves to get the teacher's attention, and then he does this. This is our manual sign from my way. This guy. So it's ba-ba-ba, this. Then it turns into, this drops out for him, and you're going to see this. This means a break, no more work. You're going to see this, and you're going to hear stuff. Stuff, it started out like this, but I'm shaped down to this. This means give me my stuff. He has a lot of toys. And then you're going to see this, and this is weird. It just evolved into this, and the team was fine with it because he's in a specialized school. Burr, burr. This is play with me. Okay, he's trying to say play, but it comes out like some kind of cluck. Okay, so this is the first video in the beginning of the process.
Sir, it's time to get down and do a little work together. We gotta go to the table and work on some stuff. Come on over and have a seat. It's my way, sure.
Do you notice how he said my way and she ignored it? We purposely turn away from kids. We make them get our attention and then intentionally, yeah, I'm using that word, intentionally communicating to us to produce that outcome. But then later, she works with them to differentiate the man. That graph shows it's a heck of a process, but here's what it looks like towards the end there. When I mean heck of a process, it's just, now when the kids ask for a break, then you say what else, and you prompt the other sign, and they get their tangibles. You know how to do these things, okay? It just takes time. It's teaching.
Yes, yeah. You wanna be all time. You got it. And your stuff? These? Sure. Play! You wanna play?
If you look at the graph, a lot of the time he doesn't do the play response because sometimes he just doesn't want to do his work and wants to be alone with his toys, and that's why you always need to differentiate the mand repertoire. Please know that the omnibus man is just a step along the way. We have to get to differentiated manding, and we do. This is an example of a child with vocal verbal, the same kind of process. This is a complex FCR.
All right, Kimmy. What's up? Oh, yeah.
This is differentiated. Now, he also has a repertoire for her to play with him. He didn't man that. He asked for a picture and a xylophone. How would we ever know that those things go well together? Okay, and that's precisely why we need to get to a point where we're honoring the man. So one last point on this. If a child has good vocal verbal behavior, some people are really bummed out about going back developmentally and just doing my way, please. I get that. But please, I want you to reframe your understanding of what this will do if you haven't done it yet. When you take a child with very good language and you teach them my way, please, it doesn't decrease the rate of manding. It increases the rate. There'll be a study by Rachel Mitras will hopefully show these data. But this is what it looks like if I could just give a kind of a soft perspective on it. When a child with language, when they say my way, please, and you say yes, of course, it's like the gateway to the kingdom is open. And now they step in, they're like, okay, well, seeing it's my way, I'd like you to sit here. I want to play Uno, my rules. I want these. And there's just all this languaging going on. So understand, the omnibus man does not take the kid back with language that has language. It pushes them forward. And you don't have to trust me. We'll publish the article, but do it. And I think that's what you'll see. If a child, by contrast, does not have a good language repertoire, you're right. They'll stick with my way for the rest of their life until you teach and get that precise repertoire built. Okay. We have 45 minutes left, correct? Okay. I got to switch it up because I'm going to lose you. So here we go. I'm going to do a bad program for teaching someone to wait. I want you to take notes on all the things I'm doing that are poor. James, will you do this exercise with me? Very good. Come on up. Let's hear it for James Miller. Let's pretend like this is a bag of Skittles. And again, I want you to note all the things I do that might be goofy. Okay? Hi, James. How are you today?
Hi.
Great. We're going to work on a weighting program. So let me just get my data sheet. And I got my timer. I got my Skittles. Okay. Oh, I got some Skittles here. These are good. Wait. Wait, James. Click.
Skittle.
I'm at 2 minutes, so I'm at 2 minutes. It's good waiting, James.
Skittle.
Ding, 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 ding. Oh, here you go, James. Good job waiting. Okay. And then those trials repeat 10 times. Okay. Tell me all the terrible things I did in this program to teach James to wait. It's okay, yell it out. He manded multiple times, and I reinforced, but I was just reinforcing according to time. And that's the problem. If you do waiting programs where you wait for the timer to end and then you provide the reinforcer, you're going to reinforce whatever accidentally is appearing in that temporal space. And maybe the stuff that occurred before that, as you noticed in a chain, which is really sharp, that happens in these waiting programs. What else is maybe a little weird about what I did?
Well, with any good drug dealer will tell you, you always give the customer a little taste.
Very good. So we have a drug dealer in the front row. Super. So if you didn't hear that, as any good drug dealer knows, you've got to give a little of your product away, get them hooked, and then you raise the price. Okay? And so, same thing here. I agree with you, James, in some awkward way. I agree with you in the sense that I'm going to start out by saying Skittles, and when he says Skittle, I'm going to give him a Skittle. I'm going to reward communication immediately some of the time, and some of the time I'm going to say no. When he handles it, I'm going to let that pay off, and some of the time I'm going to, we haven't got to this part, but let's get there, I'm not giving any rewards based on time, because that's sloppy and that's an accident, and I need something better. I'm going to wait until James engaged in a contextually appropriate behavior that I taught him, and when he engaged in enough of that, then and only then is the delay going to end. In other words, time-based delay is not the best. Performance-based delay, otherwise known as contingency-based delay, that allows you to shape repertoires of behavior. Don't do bad waiting programs like I did for many years, okay? Be smart about them. Thank you, James. That's what that says. The other thing is we don't signal when it's going to end. Keep hope alive. We've emphasized that. Let's talk about delay for a minute. I want you to reconceptualize this. I talk to my students about this way. I don't think there's any delay. I can't handle any delay. I am as impulsive as they get. There aren't delays in my life, to be honest. There are simply times where I'm experiencing reinforcer A, or it's B, or it's C, or I'm engaging in some behavior trying to obtain those reinforcers. But I'm never just sitting there, yearning, not doing anything. I mean, most people, we can't turn it off. And so I want you to think about this from your client's perspective, and I want to use this chart to try to make this point. When you put the EO in place and they communicate and you provide reinforcement, you'll readily agree with me that there's no delay. That's an FR1, immediate reinforcement. We'll all agree on that. But think about this when the reinforcer isn't provided until they do 4 things accurately. Look at that bottom row. The EO is presented, they communicate, it's denied, they tolerate. They then engage in 4 academic responses, let's say, and then you hit them with the reinforcer. There's certainly a delay between communicating and getting the reinforcer. But I want you to reimagine the functional unit here as that whole chain. I think that this is all FR1, immediate reinforcement. What changes is the response. Sometimes the response is this big, and sometimes the response is this big, and sometimes the response is this big. But the response is always being immediately reinforced. It's just the response lengthens or contracts. I think that's why we get kids out to further distances, because there is no reinforcement delay, because we're always shaping responses that fill the time when you can't have reinforcement. And I think that's what people do that we might call self-controlled. They merely have repertoires of behavior when they can't have what they want at the moment. Okay. Remember to provide reinforcement for short chains of behavior. I'm going to give you a stupid word. They're called surprise shorties. I'm going to say something even dumber. I have a 15-year-old boy. He's really into hip-hop. Okay, I'll just say it. My wife has always been into hip-hop. And so I like all kinds of music, but there's a fair amount of hip-hop in my world. I also coach basketball, and so that's part of that culture and all that. So there's a lot of hip-hop in my world. And if you listen to hip-hop, raise your hand if you do. It's okay. Yeah, it's pretty common nowadays. You might have heard the term surprise shorty. Surprise shorty is like your girl on the side that shows up unexpectedly. That's a surprise shorty in hip-hop. It's true. You listen to any hip-hop song, there's something about surprise shorties in there. So I link it to that. Completely inappropriate relationship. So you do not forget the concept of a surprise shorty. I'm not talking about your little girlfriend or boyfriend that's showing up on the side, on the sly. Don't do that, you bad person. What I'm talking about are when you tell the child, come on over, let's do some work. And from their perspective, it's like a pile of, and they're going to have to shovel that, and it's going to be a ton of, but they sit down and they pick up the shovel and they stick it in there and you say, you're awesome, get out of here. That's a surprise shorty. That's not something I just use with kids with autism. That's something I use with my own kids. One of my children kind of likes school, likes a lot of aspects of academics. One of my other children does not love school that much, into other things, if you will. And so early on, when he would come home and I would say, what kind of work you got to do tonight, buddy? He's like, I got to write this essay. And he's grumbling about this, that, or the other thing. And he'd say, I'm going to go shoot hoops. Why don't we go shoot hoops? So I hear someone in the driveway, they're shooting. I'm going to go play ball. I'm like, no, you're going to do your homework. Sit down and get to work. You just told me you got a lot to do. And he sits down and he sharpens his pencils and he opens his book and he reads and he writes his first sentence. And then I go in there and I say, you're awesome. That's hard. Get out of here. Go shoot some hoops. We'll do this later. Are you with me? That's a surprise shorty. I've been using them my whole life. It's one of my favorite parenting tactics. Okay? Keep hope alive. Surprise people with the reinforcer. And you'll get a lot of behavior the next time. I'm going to show you a few more case examples. I'm going to talk about parent training, and I'm going to talk about what we do with chronic and intractable stereotypy. It's a very similar process, but we get outcomes that I haven't seen before in my own research and practice group, and I want to share some of those with you. Parent training, I mentioned it earlier. I want to emphasize it again. We'll either work in the home or clinic or in a school consult model. Sometimes it depends on who's inviting us in, but often with parents, they get a choice. If they're in the clinic, they get a choice of doing the process or watching us do it, and then we transfer it. For this young boy right here, there's a complicated graph where we take measures of what parents are doing and not doing, and we give them feedback, so it's just behavior skills training. However, with this particular boy, he did not misbehave with any of the behavior analysts. The mom had to do the process. So a lot of times parents are involved from the beginning because the child is reactive to us. And this is one of those children. So I'm going to show you first the pre-test. This is where we ask the parent to follow the child's lead about half the time, but then ask them to do what needs to be done the other half of the time. In this case, it was developmentally appropriate homework.
You have to come here and work on some of this homework.
Maybe it's just like a secure camera thing.
Secure camera thing. So get to work on this math. And then you have to do all of these math problems, okay? Work on them. No, you can't have that.
Oh, wait.
No.
I need to concentrate.
No.
I need to concentrate.
No. John,
I need to concentrate.
you gotta do the math. No.
That's how I concentrate.
Okay, well I need you to do the math.
Now I can't figure it out without that.
Well, you'll be able to figure
I
it
can
out. Go
think.
ahead.
I have to think with that.
No, you don't need that to
Well,
think.
then I can't think.
Add the numbers up and start
I'm
writing.
trying to.
Well, you have to put the pencil in your hand and write in order to do
I'm
it.
trying to think, Mom.
And you're gonna have to go really fast because when you're in school, they're gonna ask you to do them really fast. So you have to keep working on it.
You're gonna ask me that.
Yeah, they are.
You're not.
John,
You
yes,
never asked me that.
they've asked you that before. They want you to work on stuff fast.
You have not.
Okay, you get the point. This is not an uncommon situation. This is called homework in America. Okay? Unfortunately. I wish you would just a little more teaching in school. But anyways, sorry if that offends your sensibilities, but what's up with all the homework, people? Let's program that instruction in school and let kids play basketball at night. So this is... Was that the most provocative thing I said today? Okay. Write that down. Okay. So the mom goes through the same skill-based process. We just coach her. And she starts with communication, rebuilds the trust with her son. They're not doing homework for quite some time until he's communicating, tolerating. Okay. We use this thing. This is in, you have a workbook. It's posted. A lot of the things I'm going to refer to now are in this workbook. This is what we call a parent training rubric. It's in 2 columns. Do this, don't do this. Sorry, I still say don't do things. I don't know if it's politically incorrect. And then we have child-led time, that's the reinforcement time, parent-led time, and then how you transition between the two. How do you do intermittent, unpredictable reinforcement? So we use this with parents to give them feedback after every session. It's, again, in your in the workbook. At the end, this is what the homework session looked like. Not at the end, somewhere towards the beginning, middle of chaining.
Excuse me.
Yes.
May I have my way, please?
No.
I understand.
Okay, but first I want you to do
Sweet.
read this
All these kids are good
paragraph
kids.
and then answer questions 1 and 2.
Kendra and her mom left their house on Oak Street to go to school. Kendra put on her safety belt. About the same time, Lacey and her mom left their house.
Okay, now I want you to do this problem. There you go, now you can have your way.
It's pretty chill. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. Our goal is to get it so parents support kids and walk away and do what else they need to do in the house. Okay. Let's show Carl. I want to make it clear we try not to divorce parents of all the chaos that they're going to have in the home even when they're in the clinic. We encourage them to bring the other children, especially infants and toddlers, and we do the process with the infants and toddlers in the room, and it's a little bit of a show. But nevertheless, this is a great mom with several kids, and this is the baseline.
Hey,
The child she's playing with now is the child referred to the clinic. The other one's the brother.
Clean up this. Oh yes, you have to clean up. No, you're not gonna play with people because you made a mess. Clean up first. Yes. Clean up first. Oh. No. One.
He put himself in the corner, yes. I just want to make sure. Mom did not do that.
3, 4, 5. Go
Careful.
clean up.
I don't want to.
Oh, you have to clean up.
Okay. That's typical parent interaction. They're trying to get something done, and so this is after the process. Mom did all the sessions. So this is where a BCBA and analyst, no one is working with the child other than the mom, supported by the analyst with that rubric.
Okay, let's clean up.
Mommy.
Yes.
Mommy, please.
No, not right
That's
now.
fine.
Put the plate on the table.
We work a lot on very
Play
precise
quietly
instruction
with the
following. Put the green one in the round bucket. Kids like to insert little
Good job.
controlling behaviors.
Give me
when
one
parents are
fish.
trying to prompt them.
Thank you. You did such a great job. Your turn. Here we go. You did awesome.
Okay. So again, there's different ways to implement this. Sometimes you have a BCBA, sometimes parents watch, sometimes parents do, sometimes it's in the home, sometimes it's in the school. Those are not roadblocks. Okay. I'm going to do some bonus content now. This is where I'm going to talk about chronic intractable stereotypy and what we do for that. So this is stereotypic motor and vocal behavior that's clearly reinforced directly by its sensory products. This is not behavior that's socially mediated. They're not doing it to get attention or escape or stuff. And I want to make it clear we do a very similar process. These data are not published yet, and so these are new data. We've done other studies on stereotypy. We showed that kids prefer chained schedules over multiple schedules. That was an article published in JABA last year. What I mean by that is, if you ever taken red and green cards, when the red card's out, there's no stereotypy, you block it. When the green card's out, kids are allowed to engage in stereotypy. We're trying to get stimulus control over stereotypy with these cards by correlating them with differential consequences for that behavior. Multiple schedules generally don't work terribly well. Chain schedules is a little wrinkle that make that multiple schedule work terribly well. A chain schedule is the same game, red card, green card, except to get the green card, it doesn't change based on time, which is a multiple schedule. You have to earn it. And you earn the green card by inhibiting stereotypy and engaging in a contextually appropriate behavior. And when you do that, put a contingency between the alternation of those two periods, kids learn to inhibit stereotypy and you get very tight stimulus control. When the green card's up, whoop, 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 red card, and they're ready to learn. When they engaged in enough accurate responses, green card, and the reinforcer is mere access to their own automatically reinforced behavior. It's a study published by Dr. Slayton. It was published, I think, in 2016 in JABA. When we were done with that study, we weren't satisfied. I still think it's a little hokey. I still think we weren't addressing the core symptoms of autism with that treatment. And so Dr. Slayton and I collaborated on this project and some others. We taught children to request access to their own stereotypy. We taught them to handle it when those requests were denied, the same way I talked about earlier. And we taught them to engage in contextually appropriate behavior when they couldn't engage in stereotypy. This is a schematic of what that procedure looks like. We're still using the red and green cards because understand we're only trying to manage stereotypy during conditions under which we're trying to teach these particular kids. Let's talk about that for a minute. When do you treat stereotypy? We treat it when it interferes with learning, when it interferes with social skill development, when the prohibition of stereotypy escalates to severe problem behavior. Those are the conditions to teach it. Maybe when it's stigmatizing, when they're kind of developmentally advanced and we're trying to go out and get jobs and girlfriends and all that. But other than that, we try to have more of a hands-off policy, and that requires some discussion with families who really sometimes want it merely simply eradicated. So we're at a tabletop situation. We're trying to work with these kids who are not passing any IEP goals because all the materials, they tap, shake. They don't attend the materials. They just put their arm out to be prompted, or they're engaging in vocal stereotypy or eye-gazing away from the field that we're trying to teach them in. Okay? I'm going to show you data from Milo first. Milo is a 12-year-old boy with autism. He had no vocal verbal behavior. The records made it fairly clear he had no manding. He did not lead. He did not point. He was the coolest of cucumbers. He just sat back and let life happen. He was a sweet kid who engaged in a ridiculous amount of motor stereotypy and some vocal stereotypy. He had not passed an IEP goal, a tabletop IEP goal, in a long time. He was going to be let go from the school because they didn't feel like they were serving him properly because of that. These were the typical behaviors for Milo as far as his stereotypic behaviors. Please understand, this is what we call a first things first model. We're going to worry about motor stereotypy, and then we're going to worry about vocal stereotypy. So please be patient. I promise I'll get to the vocal stereotypy. The first thing we do is put the child in the room alone with objects. If people report that they engage in stereotypy with objects, and we measure the base rate of stereotypy, and we see if it persists when no one's around. And it did. And if you look at the top graph, it's very small. I'm sorry. The first phase is that alone condition, and he indeed engaged in stereotypy in 100% of the intervals. We then do what we call an instructional baseline, because sometimes that takes down the rate. What we ask the teacher to do is half the time try to teach him his IEP-related tasks. The other half of the time, let him engage in stereotypy. And so then we distinguish the data on this graph. The black data points are during the S minus, that is during the teaching time when we don't want stereotypy. The S plus time, the green card, is depicted by the open circles. That's when we relent and say, it's okay, do it. And you'll see here that when she tries to instruct him, there's a little decrease in the rate of stereotypy because she's modeling and guiding and all that. This is the teacher, by the way. This is a consult model. So Dr. Slayton mainly provided the consult, did not work directly with the child. And so you're going to see other cases where we're doing this at a distance with kids that are in D.C. and different states, and we simply support people at a distance in this research. So some of the teaching tactics are not ours. They're those programs. We only work on the treatment with them. This is the instructional baseline video, so you can see what Milo does with academic materials.
Put it back. Give him a second. Match 4.
That's hand stereotypy under the desk. He's flapping, tapping.
You can say like
Match J. No, that's J.
He's very compliant in the sense that he'll always
Match G.
put the card somewhere. If you look at the very bottom panel, that's accuracy. It's at chance levels.
No, that's G.
Okay. Boy has no vocal verbal behavior. I wanted them to use a picture exchange. They didn't want to use picture exchange because they said if you hand him a picture, he's just going to shape it, tack it, tap it. Okay, you're right. Let's use a sign. They don't want to use a sign because he does all funny things with his fingers, and he engages in a lot of stereotypy with his fingers. I'm like, okay, fine. And at some point, I'm out of ideas. And Jessica said, why don't we try doing a vocal verbal? And I'm like, well, you're going to have to be in there shaping a whole bunch. You're going to try to shape a word. There's nothing in his history he's ever said a word. And so she decided to go with that because she was really put off by the using an object or using something with his hands. And good for her, because what she taught me again is that if you hold kids to high expectations, they just might meet those expectations. What I'm going to show you now is the third 10-minute session of simple communication training.
All right, bud. It's time for work. Play, please. Yeah, you can play. Nice job.
yeah, no, you
parents and his staff claim that was his first vocal verbal. He's 12 years old. And he learned that in 3 10-minute sessions when the reinforcer was merely access to his own stereotypy. There's no candies, there's no treats, there's no privileges, there's no tokens, there's not even praise necessarily. It's the reinforcer's right there, it's right under our nose. If kids engage in chronic levels of motor or vocal stereotypy, it's clearly reinforcing. And if it's not injurious, we can leverage that to develop skills. This is complex communication.
Can I play, please? Can I play, please?
Yes.
And the SLP will notice there's some articulation things, there's things going on there, but that is a beautifully clear response that most people could respond to.
Can I play, please?
Sure, nice job.
Again, this is his teacher. This is not us doing this. She's doing this with support. This is now the talent response.
All right, buddy. It's time for some work.
Can I play, please?
Not right now.
Okay.
Hey, you know what? Nice job waiting. You can play.
No.
Understand, this is what I mean by trust building. There's no work being done. We simply have expectations that are fairly consistent. Then we introduce intermittent, unpredictable. Sometimes communication works. Sometimes you're going to be disappointed. Just tolerate. And now we're going to get the chaining. So what this table outlines are the changes the team made. So first we asked for his easiest program, one that he might actually be able to be accurate with, that they saw some glimmers of hope, and that was matching pictures. The field size, we made a field size of 3 to increase the odds of an accidental correct, so we could reward that. So there's a 33% chance he's going to lay it on the right one. Understand the criteria here to get access to a stereotypy is based on accuracy, not cooperation. You have to do it right. And then when you have to do 3 correct in a row. The yellow shows how the program changed over time. So then it goes from the demands go from 1 to 3 to 1 to 6. You notice they go down to 1 to 10. What do we call the 1? That's a surprise shorty, my friends. The 1. We don't always require 10 at the end. The 1 always sticks around. Remember that, please. Understand that all his IEP tabletop tasks are eventually included. The field size goes from 3 to 6 to make sure he has to engage in more discriminated responding, and the total demands escalate to a total of 27, with the most in a row being 10. So he has to, when I say 10, let me tell you what this means. If the trial is 10, that means he has to do 10 accurate responses in a row in the absence of manding or stereotypy.
Your break's all done. It's time for some work.
Can I play, please?
No.
Okay.
Finish up saying okay. Look, 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 look. Drink. Good work. Bike. Good work.
That's stereotypy. Criteria
Pants.
reset.
Nice.
You notice how he looks at her
Look.
usually after he responds.
Look, look. W. That is good W. B. Nice. Z. Good work. B. Nice. You can play now. Yeah, we decided before.
I want you to notice a couple things. Why is he checking in with her? Because of intermittent and unpredictable reinforcement, because he never knows if that's going to be the one. Here's the other thing I like about unpredictable. When she has to reset the contingency, notice she doesn't say anything. He had to do 5 things accurate, and then at 4 he whipped out a little stereotypy. She doesn't go, "Oh, you were so close. One more would have done it, my buddy." She doesn't take the 4 tokens earned and take them away to teach him about that resetting contingency. It simply happens. From his perspective, he doesn't know that it wasn't 15 he had to do. It was but 5. Let the contingencies operate. We don't talk about them. The main thing is this: I don't want kids having an emotional reaction to loss under these teaching situations. We might put that in as a therapeutic target eventually. We simply put the contingency in place. When you do 5 things in a row perfectly, without problem behavior, without stereotypy in this case, then reward happens. And let the contingencies operate. Trust your contingencies. If you start with a low requirement and eventually escalate it, you're going to get these beautiful chains of behavior. Show you another boy. This is Grant.
Time to work.
He too didn't engage in any accurate academic behavior. He was super compliant. He always responded. It was just always wrong.
Find the fingers.
He usually echoed, right? They're looking for a receptive ID, and he's echoing.
Which one do you drink?
Okay. This is with a teacher. This is a generality test. She didn't do any of the process with him. This is what I mean by skills travel. And I want you to notice what's happening during the reinforcement interval, both at the beginning of the video and in the end.
ABC.
ABC.
A, B, C.
All right. It's time to work.
Wait,
Not right now.
okay.
What time?
What of for you?
1:30. Right. What time? 5 o'clock. Oh, it is. What's happening? Zipping pants. What's happening? Water. What's happening? Good. All right. You can.
ABC.
ABC.
Okay. The point is this: when we use stereotypy as a reinforcer, we do not leave the child. It's critical. You don't walk away. You stay with them. You stay oriented towards them and available to them. All our stereotypy as reinforcer intervals turn into social interactions. I do no programming for that. It just happens. Are you with me? I don't know why, but understand the context that serves as a reinforcer changes over time, and it's not merely access to stereotypy. It's synthesized and it develops. And I know that sounds bizarro. Do it. Don't walk away from kids with autism who engage in stereotypy. Be part of it. There's other people telling us about this, and they're not behavior analysts, so we tend to ignore them, but they're on to something. Okay. I'm going to end on an important point regarding vocal stereotypy now. I'm going to use these graphs to make it. These are what we call discrimination indexes. It's simply a collapsed measure where we're looking to see if, in this case, motor stereotypy is under control of the cards. So we take the amount of stereotypy that occurred during the green card, when it's okay to do, we divide it by the total amount of stereotypy, i.e. that in red and green. And we get a simple index. If it's at 100, it means he's only engaging in the motor stereotypy during the green and doesn't even try once in the red. That's stimulus control. It's not under control of the contingency, the block, the dissuasion. It's under control of the cards. And you'll see for these learners that you have a lot of data points up at 100% for motor stereotypy. This is under control of the cards. So that you notice that those teachers, there's not a lot of blocking. When we first used stereotypy as a reinforcer, this is what we looked like. We had sweatbands on, our wristbands on. We were hovering over people. We were karate chopping and blocking. But over time, you don't need to do that because it comes under stimulus control. It looks better. That's what we're looking for. But I'm showing the gray bars show that as the amount of work increases, it's still staying under control of the cards that are, again, correlated with the contingencies. But this is the interesting part. These are the data, discrimination indexes for vocal stereotypy. We did not treat vocal stereotypy for the 3 kids in this study. They all had some form of vocal stereotypy, but we did not dissuade it. We don't block vocal stereotypy. We did not use response interruption redirection. And what you'll notice for Grant, the boy you saw in the second set of videos, was that his vocal stereotypy came under stimulus control of the cards despite us not doing anything for it. And maybe we should have predicted that because there's a whole bunch of studies from the 60s, Gershon Berkson and others, where they showed that vocal and motor stereotypy tends to co-vary. So as one goes down, the other goes down. One goes up, the other goes up. They're members of the same response class. You treat one, you might get effects on the other. That's cool. You'll notice, however, with the other 2 children, Milo and Marco, that we had pretty good stimulus control vocal stereotypy, but it got kind of crummy towards the end as work requirements escalated. But here's the neat part. I want you to look at this bottom graph. That's his accuracy, just for Grant. His accuracy was at chance levels. By the end, his accuracy was near 100%. So now the question is vocal stereotypy a problem? If he's meeting all his IEP goals? To me, the answer is no. So I want you to embrace this notion, at least in this teaching context, the answer is no. I want you to embrace this notion of first things first. Object and motor stereotypy are much more treatable than vocal. Don't be aggressive going to the vocal at first. If there's motorist vocal object stereotypy, try to treat that. You may get covariation. If you don't, you might get management of it that's sufficient for the child to be an effective learner. If you don't, our recommendation is to consider something like response interruption redirection, which is basically ask people 3 questions or having them do 3 motor compliances when they emit a vocal stereotypy. But do not do that on its own. The person who talks most about RIRD is Bill Ahern. He's one of my colleagues in our doc program. He too would tell you, don't do it alone. Do it as part of a package or a system. We put RIRD in this system. Do you see what I'm saying? We still use differential reinforcement of the skills while using RIRD. Okay. We got good social validity, lovely. Okay. So bottom line with stereotypy. Treatment can be function-based. Access to stereotypy is a powerful reinforcer. And by the way, that's synthesized too. When they earn their reinforcer, they go from this to us being over here while they're doing this. There's probably a little bit of negative and positive reinforcement as part of that interaction. Understand that the core reason why kids get the diagnosis of autism are language impairments, social skills issues, and repetitive behavior and need for sameness. Those videos I just showed you address those 3 core symptoms. Not completely. There's a lot of work to be done, but this process can begin to address the core symptoms with autism in one place. Not a program for this problem and a program for that problem, a program that addresses the core issues associated with the diagnosis. Okay, we got a little bit of time. A whole 10 minutes. So what I'd like you to do is, if you would, I want you to jot down a comment or a thought. I want you to share it with your neighbor, and then we'll have a few minutes to have a conversation before we all part. So 2 minutes of writing, thinking, and sharing. Thank you. don't see one. I'll repeat it, no worries.
I'll check the other one just in case.
Okay. Okay, gang, let's get back together as a group. Please know there's a risk in coming to a great conference like this and only showing published data. It may not have enough new stuff. There's also a risk of showing you data that has not been through peer review, which is what I elected to do. These are the authors I want you to consider looking for. Again, you have access to this PowerPoint. They are the leaders of these studies that I show you. Understand that they are part of my graduate research team, and they are very smart, hardworking folks. And if I get to teach you anything, it's because of their efforts. I just get to be the one often to go on the road and show off their work. So look for them, look for their names over time. Okay. So questions, comments. So let's start with the woman in back. I'll do my best to repeat the question, and then we'll try to, someone in the room will answer it. I'll take a first crack. Yes? Okay, wow, that's a great, I've never had that question before. So the setup was, a lot of us have to write goals for insurance companies. Can you give us a description of an objective written relevant to performance-based delay, for instance? Okay. So the objective might be something like this. The learner will, on 5 out of 5 trials, engage in 5 accurate academic responses in the absence of problem behavior and manding for 2 consecutive sessions. Great. And then let's bounce that up there, you know. And obviously with that objective should be objectives that communication responses will maintain. Tolerance responses will maintain. So understand the objectives are important to make sure all 3 elements of the repertoire persist. But it's always, you know, the learner will, and the X many trials. That brings me back to that initial point I brought up, that we make decisions based in general on 5-minute or 5 trial bits of behavior, and I can't emphasize the importance of that enough. So if you look at the workbook, we have a crazy table that shows you our criteria and how we escalate through the shaping process. If you spend 5 minutes with it, you'll figure it out. The point here is that if you make decisions based on all-day data or hour worth of data, the kid will be stuck at step 2 for the rest of their life. So if the criteria is 5 trials in a row, 0 problem behavior, fully independent, you might be able to achieve that in 5 to 10 minutes, and then you can shape and move on. If you make decisions based on 1 day's worth of data, they'll never have 0 problem behavior and 100% independent all day, and then you're going to be spinning your tires. Are you with me? So rather than lower your criteria, keep your criteria high and base it on small bits of behavior so you can be an efficient shaper. So thanks for the question, because I think we want to build in those short bouts of performance excellence to be able to move this process along in a manner that's defensible, you know, fast enough. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. There is no way in hell I can repeat your question because it was many questions. 1 per customer, miss. Well, I'm just kidding. Those are all great questions, but I am going to ask you to help me. Let's go one at a time. Tell me your first question because it was a good one. And they manned. Very good. Let's go with that one. So you expect 10 accurate responses in the absence of problem behavior and in the absence of manding. However, you're at 5, 6, and they stop manding. What do you do? Our general rule of thumb is manding would reset the contingency. I'm looking for reinforcement to occur with a clean chain of behavior. I don't want it spotted with things that we're not going to appreciate later. Now, if you start with 10, it's going to be a problem because you're going to reset so much you might get what Skinner called, I love this term, a boolia. just like complete extinction, just a long period of time with no reinforcement. And that's precisely what we don't want in a therapeutic process. And that's why it needs to be progressive. We're going to start out, you just have to do one thing accurately without demand. Nailed it. 2 things. Now arrange from 1 to 3. That shaping process is so critical because we're going to teach them to be expert there. I'm okay resetting 3 and reinforcing 3 accurate responses without demand. We can probably do that without any extinction sequelae, right? But as we stretch the chain, it could be a problem, and that's why we need to go very slowly. If a child has decent language and they don't seem to be getting it, let me make it clear that we do talk during a little reflection period. We might say, hey, listen, you had to do a lot of work today. What do you think? We try to have them discover contingencies and maybe get some rule governance going that way. But I don't start with the rules because we got kids that are oppositional. And as soon as you tell them, as soon as you show your hand, they're going to do something different. Okay, you had another question?
And then how do you respond to mans that occur at the same time as problem behavior or just after problem behavior?
It's a super question, so I want to talk about that. So the question again is how do you, you got a microphone, I don't need to repeat it. How do you respond to mans that occur right before or right after problem behavior? Very good. When we're teaching a child demand, we're in that acquisition phase. A woman named Robin Landa, this is her dissertation, hopefully it'll be published at some point. We basically used to put in a 5 to 10 second timeout after, if they engage in problem behavior, no matter what the next responses were, there would be no reinforcement for 10 seconds to avoid chaining. Okay? But what would happen is during that 10-second period, kids would escalate their problem behavior, and that was worse than chaining. So instead what we do is if in the acquisition phase, the child omits problem behavior and then mans, we provide reinforcement. If they omit problem behavior, we prompt the mand, they mand, we reinforce it. And we don't get chaining. And the reason why is most of the time the mans are not preceded by problem behavior. Only some of the time are we providing reinforcement for the chain. And so over time, the man stands alone. It's about the relative probability of this versus this. As long as the probability of reinforcement for just the man is higher, we think you're safe. So I'm sorry if that's a little convoluted, but the point is we prompt after problem behavior, especially in the acquisition phase, because we don't want escalation. We hazard the chaining to prevent escalation. We sometimes don't do that late in the therapeutic process because a mere expectant look or lack of change on our part is enough to evoke the correct behavior. In other words, we don't prompt later. Thank you for those questions. They were great. Yes, miss? No, the question was, is everyone in the enhanced choice model? No, the enhanced choice model is very new. We have some kids going through it. Our first criteria were kids with language, for whom it was very clear the team could not handle escalation because we were working with them, say, in public school, or because we were working in a clinic where their problem behavior would not be manageable, where they were big and they ran out of classrooms and police were involved at their schools, and so those were the first candidates. But we're now doing it with kids without language, and that involves merely putting a piece of tape down the middle of the room and having 2 rooms that have the exact same set of materials. If they step this way, we correlate it with colors. Let's say a green card. This is the yearn and earn side. If they step this way, this is non-contingent reinforcementville. The learners will step each way haphazardly. Over time, they experience those differential outcomes, and we're seeing slight migration towards contingent reinforcement. It's slow, and I know we're going to meet a child who will always make the wrong choice. And I don't know what to tell you about doing what we do then. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, I guess. But the kids are going into it kind of out of necessity. They're being selected because the context suggests we couldn't serve them if we don't do everything we can to make sure there's no escalation. And please know this has not been thoroughly vetted, and I can't impart the technology to you yet. but I can't help but share it because I want you to know where we're going and I want you to know what's possible. Yes, miss? Yes, in that situation, the school, the adults indeed do follow them into their non-contingent reinforcement space. We often give it a name like the hangout space. Some kids just elect to go back to their classroom because, again, we primarily do this as a pullout, so it's really a choice of 3 options. You can come do the practice, the yearn and earn. You can go to the hangout space, or you can stay in your classroom. And there's, there are a lot of kids in special ed that we're serving through proxy, through consulting, that they have zero trust of the people that are being paid to help them. And so they're reluctant to leave the classroom. When they leave the classroom, they kind of trying things on for size, and it's a slow warm-up period. There's not a lot of 100% choices towards yearn and earn with some learners, but over a period of a week or so, they learn that when they go to that space, very little behavior yields a powerful outcome. Contingent reward is usually preferred to non-contingent reward, and we're off to the races. But please don't be put off by kids making bad choices in the beginning. That's the point. The adults are engaging. Now, we used to be, when we first did this kind of casually, it wasn't scientifically balanced. We were like a little more qualitatively rich in the yearn and earn space. But we're trying to do this scientifically, meaning we take videos and we have people blind to the IVs asked to describe the qualitative features of the reinforcer so we can see it's the same. It's the same. So I'm telling you, don't degrade the reinforcers in the hangout space, because then you may get problem behavior because of that, especially with savvy, language-able kids. Trust that kids prefer to yearn and earn. Give them all their reinforcers for free in that hangout space, and they just might surprise you and choose to earn them. That's what we're seeing. There's no promises. We got to do this. We got to replicate this more, but that's what we're seeing. Okay. Oh, shoot, we went over. You're not allowed to go over at the NAC? It was great seeing you. Good luck with your work. There's a poster session. Let's go to it.
I think we'd all gladly take a few more minutes of your time if we could, but yes, poster session. Thank you so much, Dr. Hanley, for your time here. Such valuable information from our presenters this week. Just a reminder, if you're seeking social work CEUs, you must sign in and out every day, so make sure you do that before you leave. We're also looking for feedback on the Groupio app. This is session number 61, and your code is TUG, TUG 554. That's TUG 554.